Growing your own food is a continuous learning process, and that's what I like the most about it. You can learn on your own by reading and also through your own experiences, but I prefer to learn alongside others whenever I can. For one thing, it's faster. You are crowdsourcing information from multiple people, multiple approaches, multiple climates, different kinds of crops, and the learning rate is really accelerated. But more importantly, at least for me, is that you get to tap into this sense of connection and community, and you get to find your tribe of fellow plant nerds. That's why I do one of these videos every year, not only to be helpful to others, that is a big part of it. Selfishly, it's so that I can connect with other like-minded food growers and grow my community. This year, I am using a structure for this video that I use in my day job when I'm giving performance reviews, which is start, stop, continue. We identify the activities that we need to start doing or stop doing and the ones that we should continue doing. It's actionable and helpful at work, and I thought I would apply it this year to the garden as well. Just like at work, I will start with the continues, especially because I suspect many people watching this are just here to get a quick recommendation of crops that worked well for me. My first continue is Scarlet Kale. This was a winner for me last year and I highlighted it in that video, and it was great for me this year as well. If anything, I wish I had just planted more of it than I did. My second continue is my physical bed covers, shown here behind me. They do a great job of protecting my brassicas from cabbage moths, and they improve the eating quality of the kale. Last of my continues, and my favorite because this was my first year growing it, is rainbow chard. I freaking love it for a multitude of reasons, and I wanted to take a second to talk all of those reasons through. First, it's super easy to grow. It hasn't had any pest pressures. Chard is in the same plant family as beets, and just like beet greens, which I also grow in the summer to get my salad greens, it'll germinate in reasonably hot weather. It doesn't bolt in the heat. Unlike beets, so this is an advantage, it grows pretty tall and it provides helpful shade underneath where you can underplant things that would otherwise be prone to bolting like arugula or spinach and help create a little microclimate that nurtures them. The leaves are also huge. I've got a picture here from when I did a harvest out of the garden, and that means that the yield from a single plant is much higher than I would get from spinach or beet greens, and I love it for that reason. The other thing about chard is just its versatility for me. Because I follow the Walls diet for my MS, I eat a lot of salads. And I mean a lot of salads, like at least one or two pretty much every single day. And that means I have to be pretty much a connoisseur of salad greens or else I'm gonna get bored. In a prior video, I showed this Venn diagram of how I approach the different crops that I grow in order to try and get as many of my vegetables for the Walls categories, leafy greens, sulfur-rich, and colorful vegetables. I want to get as many of those as I can out of my own garden, and I look at my crops through that lens. If there are any leafy greens that are either sulfur-rich or bring some extra color, or ideally both, I will prioritize those in the garden because they really help to round out my diet and they give me versatility as I'm preparing meals. I'll insert another diagram here because you know I love a good data chart where I've plotted out my various salad green options to show their relative versatility. The vertical axis here is how many Walls categories they check. Things like spinach would be just a leafy green, while arugula brings sulfur, and then rainbow chard would bring extra color. Scarlet Kale checks all three boxes, and that's one of the reasons I do love it. The horizontal axis shows the preparation technique and whether they can be eaten raw or cooked or both. There are days where I just cannot eat another freaking salad. Being able to saute or scramble greens in with some eggs or a frittata or cook them into a soup really helps me to get some variety in my diet and my approaches and just not go crazy with boredom at nothing but salads. If I overlay a diagram here, you can see where my peak versatility is. Salad greens that are in multiple Walls categories and that can be prepared in multiple ways is really my sweet spot, high point of the bell curve here. You'll see rainbow chard is right up there, almost with scarlet kale and purple bok choy. And unlike those two, chard also works well in a smoothie. Extra bonus, my dogs love it. This brings me to the first of my stops. I am going to stop growing lettuce. I know it's the quintessential salad green, but when you compare it to everything else in the garden, it just doesn't have as much versatility. I can only eat it raw, it only checks one of the Walls categories. It's hard to justify carving out room for it in my garden when I have so many other choices that just bring more to the table. My second stop is to stop relying completely on the calendar when it comes to starting my spring crops. I did a prior video on mistakes I made this year, and I highlighted this, and I mentioned in that video the approach of phenology. That is relying on cues from plants in your area, subject to your climatic conditions, and looking at their behavior to tell you when you should plant certain things in your garden. Our weather is getting more and more unpredictable, and if you rely just on the calendar, you'll have the problems that I had where things are started too soon or too late, and you end up kicking yourself later. Next year, I'm going to stop using the calendar. I'm instead going to put in a little phenology mini garden with some daffodils, crocuses, probably some forsythia, and use that to guide me on when I should start some of my key spring crops. Moving to the category of starts, things I want to start doing next year. The first is a new bed design. I want to redesign these bed covers behind me in two important ways. The first is to give more vertical height at the edges. I've sketched out the current design, so forgive my art, but this design with the arched PVC pipe that are connected down to the wooden bed, and the bed here is shown in blue, and this arched shape does well to shed the snow as long as I've got that ridge beam in here, but the outer edges shown here in pink, where the cover comes down, are almost unusable with really very little clearance for crops to grow. You can also see with this broccoli here behind me, it's popping up and hitting the top of the bed. Just some extra height overall, I think would be helpful for some of those taller crops like broccoli, cauliflower, and even chard can get pretty big. I've got a design for next year that I'm going to ask Winston to build out of PVC, where I put some vertical pieces. I highlighted them in this sketch with green and drew some arrows. Those little vertical pieces will be where the arches come in, so PVC to PVC, and then that will connect to the bed, meaning I get more vertical height at the edges and the ability to plant all the way edge to edge inside the bed. Related to this is my second start, which is shade cloth. Since I'm redoing the bed covers anyway, and the whole approach, I am going to also figure out a way to have the center material on those covers be swappable and exchangeable. The reason is I would like to use shade cloth over things like broccoli, spinach, and arugula to see if I can help prevent bolting. I had a bad year for broccoli this year. I'll put in a picture. The plants were huge, but I just got these itty bitty tiny florets and they just weren't worth the garden space. I did a poll on Facebook and a couple of the other growers that had good luck with broccoli. First, they planted a different variety. I'm going to try Pac-Man instead of Waltham 29 next year, but they also used shade cloth. You can see in this sketch, I've tried to color the part that's the cover in green here in the middle. The ends, I think I can leave it as the row cover I used today, but for the middle, I'll make that swappable, and it could be clear PVC early in the spring when I'm trying to warm up the soil, swap it out for the row cover I use now for most of my growing season. And then as we get to the end of the spring crops and it starts getting hot, I can put some shade cover down and hopefully extend the life and prevent bolting and get a proper yield off of my broccoli with that shade cloth, providing some cooling of the soil. My last start is related to that, and it has to do with my strawberries. Let me take you over to that bed. We had a good crop of berries throughout June. If anything, I had trouble keeping up with them. I recommend Ozark Beauty. It's a really good strawberry. But then the rest of the year, it's a perennial. It stays in the bed and it's just kind of sitting there. And I don't like anything in my garden to perform only one function, if at all possible. Next year, I'm going to try an experiment, because I love a good experiment, where I plant my bolting-prone crops like broccoli, spinach, into the strawberries and have them act as a ground cover. And bolting generally is triggered by hot soil temperatures, not by hot air temperatures, as well as by dry soil conditions. Strawberries, if you think about it, are an awesome way to keep the soil cool because their leaves are not right on it. They're up a little bit, and that air almost acts like an insulating layer and keeps the temperatures cool underneath the shady leaves. They also retain moisture, and so the soil stays evenly moist longer, which means that I'm not only shading the soil, but I'm also keeping it from drying out, and both of those should help prevent bolting. This means I have to figure out how to carve out a little bit of space for each of those transplants so they aren't totally shaded out by the strawberries. I'll either cut back the leaves or maybe pin them back, but that seems doable. Now with the strawberries, I already have to figure out how to let bees in while keeping birds out. And I do that with chicken wire. I also used these decoy strawberry rocks this year to just confuse the birds, and that worked pretty well. In fact, it worked really well. That won't keep cabbage moths off. So what I think I need to do is, instead of shade cloth on the middle of those arched covers, I may create a version with chicken wire over the middle and see if I can use that to keep birds out, let bees in, and cabbage moths out. I don't know if that will work because cabbage moths are pretty determined creatures and those holes are pretty big. If anybody has another idea as far as material I could use, maybe hardware cloth. I feel like the mesh might be too small for bees. But if anybody has an idea or has done this, please let me know. I would love to figure out a way to let in the good guys and exclude the bad guys. That is my full list of start, stop, and continues for the 2021 spring garden. Please share your own in the comments below to add to the tribal knowledge. I personally would appreciate the chance to connect with you, and I'm sure that others would appreciate the learnings. As always, if you have any specific topics that you'd like me to cover or go deeper on of what I just did, please let me know, and I will attempt to get it addressed in a video. I hope that was helpful and that you all out there are having a great growing season. Thanks.